Rockeyez would like to welcome Bruce Kulick, formerly of Kiss with Grand Funk. Hey man, what's going on?
Hey, everything's great here in LA. Thanks for having me on your show.
Great, great. Let's go back to the very early days. Say Meatloaf. Um, what was it like touring back in those days?
Well, to be honest, Meatloaf was the first like kind of major gig I did. Even though I did tour with some artists that had some hit disco singles, and even toured in Europe and things like that. But with Meatloaf, even though he was kind of an unusual type of it was an unusual kind of band and all, it was more closer to what Kiss would do on tour, or eventually bands like Bon Jovi and all that kind of stuff. It was a large band, and my brother was the other guitarist, so that was like the cool thing about that, is that Bob and I got to play the fantasy role of splitting up the guitar parts and acting kind of like Hunter and Wagner from Alice Cooper and Lou Reed,
Right.
those guitar players. And I was a really big fan of Todd Rundgren, who produced the Bat Out of Hell record, which was extremely, just a great album that started out a little not a hit, but all it had to do was kind of get the commitment of, the record company, CBS. It was actually a smaller label through CBS. And once they committed, after actually we played like one of those conventions,
Right.
it just really blew up. And it was very exciting. I mean, I really went from our first gig being kind of booed off the stage, opening up for Cheap Trick in the Midwest, to selling out arenas and touring the world. It was stressful though, because Meatloaf definitely got into some crazy stuff from the pressure of him suddenly being this huge star. I think they always kind of had that vision of being huge, but sometimes you don't know what's going to happen until you're on the radio every 10 minutes and selling out arenas. So he was kind of hard to deal with, and I just kind of stayed away from him. My brother got in his face a lot more than I did, but that was okay. I learned a lot from touring. And I saw the world again. It was a very good training kind of camp for my future years with Kiss.
Cool, cool. And you were also in our local New Jersey, New York heroes, the Good Rats.
Yep.
How was that?
Well, I went after Meatloaf. I actually was able to do a band that had some success, nothing huge, but it was interesting that I wound up with Michael Bolton in a band called Blackjack. And we did a couple of records, but clearly the record company kind of lost faith after the second record. And the president that signed us got fired. You get to play, you play your music, but then you got to play the music business, which
Right.
Which is a different game. And then at the time, I didn't know what to do, but I wanted to play, and I was introduced to. I lived, of course, in Queens and in New York, and I was introduced to some of those guys when their guy, ironically named John the Cat, okay, of the Good Rats, and they were very popular, but really only in a tri-state area.
Right.
They always packed wherever they played, but they started to go through, some changes, and it was a great band. It was just a nice, safe place for me to kind of be and just play guitar and not think of what it's like to tour the world with massive ego craziness, or playing the record company game and struggling to be famous when you get the commitment, but it just doesn't completely click. You get some success, but not big enough for them to sustain you. So I looked at the years, almost 2 years with the Good Rats, is just getting back to the basics and just gigging 4 days a week. And I hated bars, but it was a great place for me to play, and I got a lot of compliments from fans. Maybe they didn't know who I was or cared, but I know that I made a difference and played really well with the guys, and it was music that was easy for me to play. Joe Franco was a terrific drummer. We're still friends, and the Good Rats, I think Peppy still does things, ironically, and then how ironic is that the Good Rats once was on a bill with Ozzy Osbourne as the headline. This was kind of in some college, I think, in Pennsylvania area, which was not quite tri-state, but still drivable. And that was with Randy Rhoads, so I'm telling you, how long ago. And the opening act, and man, he scared the hell out of me, and he was pissed because we were kind of more popular. The Good Rats had a bigger name in that area than Motorhead.
Right.
So
Wow.
there's Lemmy backstage, and I'm like, okay. He was not too happy to see this. You know, if he looked up what the hell the Good Rats were about, you know,
Right.
you got a kind of balding, heavy, you know, lead singer named Pepe Marcello with a baseball bat.
Right.
Okay. So I don't have to say any more. That's not exactly cool to someone like Lemmy.
Right.
But that was really interesting to be on that bill, and I got the heck out of there. I do remember watching a little of Ozzy and seeing Randy Rhoads and knowing that, like, whoa, you know, because I was a Black Sabbath fan, but I didn't, you know, that was really the start of that, you know, era for Ozzy as a solo artist. But I remember, you know, I was pretty damn impressed, but I had like a 3.5, 4-hour drive. I was like, I'm out of here.
Right. Right. Definitely. How was Michael Bolton as a person?
You know, Michael was extremely motivated and driven. I learned a lot with his drive. He clearly was not as focused as he became towards the end of, you know, the realization that, you know, sometimes things were really given to him. And, you know, we got this big record deal. He found a great band to be a part of, and I was kind of the closest guy in his band because I helped co-write a lot of the songs. My brother was originally involved, and he co-wrote a few of the songs, but he really wasn't comfortable with some of the business angles of what was happening, and I had to respect the fact that he didn't want to do it, but he had to respect the fact that I did, you know.
Right.
So it was really me and Michael with a tremendous rhythm section, Sandy Gennaro and Jimmy Haslip. But, you know, Michael first had a lot of problems with Tom Dowd, who was kind of the famous producer that was shoved down our throats in some ways. And I'm not sure if Tom had the right vision for us, but who was I to argue? The guy was like, he worked with all my heroes, you know, Allman Brothers, Eric Clapton, you know what I mean? So I couldn't, you know, like, argue with the guy. But we learned a lot, and Michael, as much as he was frustrated at times with how the things were going, he always knew, like you have to be great, you have to prioritize, you have to really focus on your strengths, you know, and you know, he was very critical whenever I would do some guitar stuff, and he knew I was a damn good guitar player, but he'd show me, like, are you really happy with that? Brian May wouldn't leave that. And I said, you're right, I'm going to fix it, you know, doing like a harmony part, you know.
Right.
So I learned from Michael that he always strove for excellence, and then when he had to go reinvent himself and first just started writing songs and then realized, wait a minute, I do better with more kind of pop R&B than rock and roll, and changed my name, and the rest is, you know, his career just took off, you know. In fact, we've been in touch a little bit more recently, which is kind of funny, and it's great to know he's still out there, and as much as he gets criticized, he really is a terrific singer, and he's extremely talented, ambitious person. And hey, he co-wrote Forever, which is such a, not only a signature song for Kiss, it was one of my signature solos, you know, that I'm so proud of. So those years with Michael, I learned a lot, and it's great to see him, you know, he's still carrying on.
Right, right. I heard that you produced a demo for Electric Angels.
Yeah, there was a good friend of mine, this guy Wayne Sharp, who worked with Kiss on one of the tours as like tour manager or a travel guy or whatever, and we were always good friends and still are. And he hooked up with a few of those guys. It's funny, a couple of those guys. Well, Jonathan, I think his last name's Daniels. I may have that wrong, but he went on to become a big manager, you know, and publisher, which is kind of funny. But they were really talented, and it was just an opportunity to play producer, you know, dress up nice and, you know, loan them my guitars and help guide their music. The demo was good, and the photo shoot they did was great, but nothing really happened to the band, which was unfortunate. I think that was back in, like, '88. That's a long time ago.
Right. Do you happen to have a copy of that demo?
I probably have something somewhere, and back then probably the best thing I had was a cassette.
Right, right. Yeah, because I posted on Facebook about that, and actually the band is looking for that demo.
Oh, that's funny. Well,
That's
go ahead and remind me. I mean, I kind of have an idea where it would be, but yeah, I probably have it. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Tell me your recollection of Mark St. John.
Well, you know, Mark, obviously I didn't meet him when I first did some ghost guitar work for Kiss, and
right.
I didn't know what was going on. I kind of heard through the grapevine that he had some sort of health issue, and the only time I really got to meet him properly was when he came out on tour with me, because they knew he wasn't going to be well enough for at least part, if not all, of Europe. So there we were 6 weeks in Europe, and that kind of gave me a real opportunity to like settle in with Kiss, as you can imagine. You know?
Right.
And I know Gene and Paul were happy, but I think they certainly knew that they needed to contractually just like see what was going to happen with Mark and give him a shot. So they took him out on tour to watch the show, kind of learn the stuff. And ironically enough, he actually would jam with me sometimes backstage. You know, I mean, I didn't want to look at him like the Tanya Harding,
Right.
debacle of ice skaters. You know, I wanted it to be more, like, I'm so blessed to have even this opportunity, even if it was cut short. I could still say I was in Kiss.
Right.
So I just kept a very healthy attitude and said, like, I'm not really in control of this except for me doing the best I can. And they let him play. After they felt like he knew what to be expected on stage. First, I think he did the first half of the show. I was always like there in the, just in case, you know what I mean? And then the second half of the show, and then they let him do a whole show. And it was kind of a strange period, obviously, for me, because there I am all ready to play, and to even just do a half a show was bizarre. But I get it. It was what they needed to do, and then of course they sent him home when they realized. I kind of saw it fall apart. They definitely did like he kind of was trying too hard, and
Right.
Even when a pretty girl that a guy's attracted to is trying too hard, it turns off the guy, and
Right.
it just didn't work, So he, I think he probably emptied the mini bar that night and
Cool.
went home the next day.
Wow.
And then years later, of course, we did some expos together. And he had some problems through the years, and it was really sad, that he passed away pretty young. But he really had I think he had a very, very interesting guitar style that I never thought was the right style for Kiss, but I knew where he was coming from, because he was into some of these like progressive kind of like fusion guitar players like Alan Holdsworth, and he could do a lot of really interesting things that a more bluesy bass player like myself didn't totally naturally go to at all. So I respected his playing, but I didn't think it was right for Kiss. But at the time, I think Gene and Paul wanted, we want the flashiest guy possible. You see what I mean? So the fact that he can kind of play these scales kind of quickly and everything, and I think Randy Jackson, Grover Jackson, Grover Jackson, the guy who built Jackson guitars, he had him kind of like high on the list of the recommendations, for a LA hotshot.
Cool. Now, back in the day when, I used to run Kiss Classics with Bill DeMott, Joe Morenti, and all my friends, you were always humble to us. When I went down to SIR Studios, you were humble to me and my staff. How do you keep that focused head instead of getting that ego that gives many people problems?
I mean, look, and I'm not perfect. There's times I can bark at people too, but honestly, I just always been really grateful of the fact that, you see, I'm doing something I love, playing music, and it's a job, and I take it very seriously, but it's also a hobby, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because I grew up with music and guitars, and to have that kind of fluke opportunity, obviously I was, talented enough and mature enough to handle it, to be a part of Kiss, and I never thought it would even last, 5 years, no less 12 years. So I just always been, appreciative of the fact that people care about what I do, and I still feel it even with all these years I'm not in the band. People are very aware of my contributions, and on occasion they're not up to speed with my most recent things, which kind of disappoints me. You know what I mean? Because I could use the support.
Right.
Funny writing someone back on Facebook who says that I'm their favorite Kiss guitarist, and and they'll mention a couple of songs or albums that just freak over me about it, and I go, hey, have you heard BK3? Knowing that Gene's on it, and it's just a well-produced, well-crafted record. And then the guy will go to he writes back, oh yeah, I checked out a few things on YouTube. Sounded great. Okay,
Right.
That's where we're at now with the music business. People will, it's one thing when I want to reference an artist that someone tells me about, and I check it out on YouTube.
Right.
Which I'll do. But give me a break, what I
Right.
mean? If you, what happened to go to iTunes and buy it? I don't care. You don't have to buy it from my website or seek it out in Best Buy, and you get what I mean,
Right.
But it just, that kind of disturbs me, but I am still appreciative of, even if they're not up to date, the fact that I meant something to them in the world of KISS, and I'm still part of that is good to me.
Right, right. But BK3, our site reviewed, and I thought it was a pretty damn good album. I was just wondering, you going to be working on something new too?
Yeah, I've been just starting to talk about writing songs, and there were a couple of, riff and chord ideas that have already started to develop, and I'll be working with Jeremy again, the guy who produced BK3, and I don't want to make any predictions that when I can get it done and everything.
Right.
And I'm trying to think of some angles business-wise how to do it, because believe me, the business has changed a lot in just the 2 years from when it was released. I put it out in February 2010, and the business is way different now still. Right. And I'm not saying in a better way, but I'm going to weigh out some options. It was kind of stuff that I just started talking with my team, the people that I like to call Team Kulick, who are always supportive and valuable to helping me make some decisions. And so, I'm looking at getting that done.
Cool, very cool. Tell me a little bit about the Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, which you're part of.
Well, I love doing the camp. I mean, you got to remember, like I said earlier, in some ways, me playing guitar is my hobby too. So for me to get to meet and play with a lot of the other counselors are people I have a lot of respect for, and I, didn't play with professionally until the camp. Someone like a Rudy Sarzo or Vinny Appice or Alan White from Yes. And then the special guests are just amazing. I mean, this last show, of course, that Paul's done it a couple of times, and that's always really cool. But this past time was Zach Wilde and Warren Haynes, the guy from Allman Brothers and Government Mule, and then Steve Vai, who's like an alien on the guitar. You know what I mean? And then Steve Stevens came in and did actually a clinic, which was great. I haven't run into Steve and like, oh God, it was probably like 85. Like right after I was in KISS.
Right.
So. And the experiences that the bands get, the campers get rather, being in bands is more than just learning music. It is a, that kind of like, team building kind of thing. I mean, the camp also does corporate things, for companies, which they don't expect them necessarily to play an instrument. They just want them to like rewrite the lyrics to a famous song, and they can have fun getting on stage and having a good time. So it works that way too. But the camp is really empowering for the people that go, and I'm really rewarded. I know I got Rudy involved because I know that, not only his talent and his personality fits it, but, he certainly has a big resume, which is great for the camp, and Rudy feels like it's changed his life. I mean, he's always like saying such amazing things about it. It's hard work, but it is really amazing to take, like 5 or 6 strangers in your band and then whip them into shape in 3, 4, or 5 days, depending on what camp it is, and get on stage and see them like shine. You know what I mean?
Right.
And play on a professional stage and everything. It's pretty amazing, really.
Cool. What's your impression of Mark Farner?
Well, Mark actually, I was always a big fan of Grand Funk, and I never saw them when I was young, but I was well aware of them, and I just knew he was like just Mr. Energy on stage and this tremendous voice, and I wasn't a fan of his guitar playing, more the sound. I knew he was a good player, but he always wanted to go the other way, so he used like this metal guitar, which was kind of weird. He used these fuzz pedals that sounded kind of strange to me. I was much more into that loud Marshall tone or Hendrix tone, you know what I mean? Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, and Jimmy Page were my heroes. But I was well aware of the band and their success, and I met him out actually because he's done the Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp as well, and that was a little awkward the first time, but once I kind of knew to break the ice, he actually worked with my brother once on a solo record that Dick Wagner was producing, and Dick was friends with my brother and hired him to be on the album with Mark, and that really broke the ice. And now Mark he's very cool with me. One time when he did the camp, and he was going to be on the Howard Stern show, and he could choose whatever counselors he wanted to help back him as his band. He asked me to help on guitar and play acoustic and stuff. So, I was always really, really, grateful for that. And he knows, I know the Grand Funk songs, and him not being in Grand Funk has nothing to do with me. It just, that's the business with Don and Mel and their old stuff. You know what I mean?
Right, right. You just got back from Australia. How was that?
Oh, a lot of fun. It was twofold. I mean, it's always great to do the live gigs, and my set list is always entertaining and different because I like to do a lot of my era. And actually, we tried a few new things that I hadn't done before from some of those records from my years. And then on top of it, there's a really cool chain there called Allen's. Well, they merged with Billy Hyde's, which is the other big chain. So now it's Allen Music, Billy Hyde's, and we wound up doing some clinics again. Now I've done clinics there before, promoting BK3 or just showing off my years with Kiss with some solo stuff. But this time the guy that I like to work with over there suggested, why don't we do, since Revenge was released in 20 years ago, why don't we do something regarding Revenge? So I did a really special clinic there, because I had all these tapes that Ezrin gave me of rough mixes and samples of the various vocal parts and things. So I ran through every song, and the clinic was over 2 hours long, and I didn't have to play that much. The story kind of unfolded from all the songs, and there was a story about every song. It's a record that I'm just super proud of, and working with Bob Ezrin was a real thrill.
Very cool. You have any impressions of the Eric Carr Unfinished Business CD?
Yeah, Loretta, some people thought, because I did some press for it, some people thought that I was involved with it, and I wasn't, only in the sense that there's a few things that were other things that were redone or overdubbed on, you know what I'm saying? But I didn't have a part of putting it together. That was all the stuff that Loretta found, and of course spoke to the other bands. You see, I was pretty aware that she doesn't have too much that wasn't already covered on Rockology,
right.
But I still applauded her enthusiasm to want to do it, and I think she did a a really good job with, for what she had, and so many people love Eric, and so many bands and musicians were affected by him and wanted to be a part of this album, so I still think it's a real thank you to Eric and a we miss you and a tribute to Eric. So I was very supportive of it, of course, and I think it's done pretty well, considering it's again, it isn't a lot of new music.
Right. What's the biggest thing you miss about the Kiss world?
Well, look, in some ways, I can always throw the name around even though I'm not in the band.
Right.
You know what I mean? But they certainly do still some really cool things. Touring is never easy, although of course they tour, very, very comfortably.
Right.
Private jet, first class hotels, all of that. But I guess on occasion I know they did, like when they did American Idol, that would have been fun for me.
Right.
When they played the Olympics, that would have been fun for me. Some of those kind of special things that only a band as famous as Kiss. And look, I did some amazing things in my years with the band, but those are the things that I always go like, oh, I would have loved to have done that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But what am I supposed to do? I'm grateful of my 12 years.
Right. Can you tell me anything that they had like special on their tour rider?
I've been asked before about the rider, and I got to be honest, it was very, very basic. When we're talking about the food stuff, it's just like kind of almost like real hearty, good deli food. Nothing crazy. There was no weird, we want M&Ms, but leave out the brown ones. You know. And even though that's a big legend, David Lee Roth and Van Halen had a great reason. If they read this,
right,
then we know that they're really looking over the details of our contract, as opposed to what if they didn't do the right lighting rig and somebody fell and killed themselves. Which, by the way, once happened at a Kiss gig. Which had nothing to do with a rider, but things like that happen. So, but I just didn't remember anything really extreme on our rider at all, to be honest. There probably was something, but the fact that I don't remember, it certainly wasn't anything too odd.
Right. Now, we just lost two major musicians in music, Ronnie Montrose and Davy Jones. Do you have any recollection of either one of them?
Well, Davy I met at one of these chiller shows that I was also a guest at, and I'm a big Monkey fan. I've worked with Mickey Dolenz at the Fantasy Camp, Okay.
Okay.
So I did take a photo with him, which is up on my site on Facebook. So that was from late 2009. I'm just a big fan, but I didn't really get to talk to him or know him. You know what I mean?
Right.
Now, but Montrose is a whole nother story. I actually rehearsed with him at the camp because he did a camp last year. I think it was early last year. And we actually learned a few of his songs, which, Eric, singer, had played with Ronnie, and when he heard he was doing the camp, Eric was like, oh, you got to do this song with him. You got to do this. You got to do this, kind of thing. And all of a sudden I delved into that Montrose record with Hagar that I heard of it, but I didn't know how good it was. You see what I mean? So I rehearsed with him. He definitely wasn't always feeling well because of his, prostate cancer and fighting that. But and then actually my girlfriend Lisa and I performed at the camp at one of the, there's always events at night, and this one was at the Gibson showroom in Beverly Hills. So everyone was just getting up and doing things. Kip Winger did an acoustic thing, and then David was kind of like the promoter. Bruce, get up there, do something. So I grabbed Lisa because she's an amazing singer and a kind of more standards is what she likes. She's not Pat Benatar, you know what I mean? She's into other stuff. So we always like kind of fooled around with this version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow, her being a big Judy Garland fan and all. And we played that, and I learned jazz chords, and I'm not a jazz player, but I did learn that stuff from a teacher back in Queens when I was getting as much music education as I could, no matter how I needed to, So I had this arrangement that I borrowed from like Eric Clapton that he has on a live record, done my way in the key that Lisa would sing it well and myself, and we pulled it off, and Ronnie was there, and he was like, man, I love those chords you were playing, and that was such a compliment for me because Ronnie, I looked at it as being one of those really, really all-rounded, amazing guitarists. So the fact that he was really enjoyed that really was very flattering to me. And there's nothing more than one of your, kind of like, an artist that you respect or one of your heroes, saying something kind to you.
Very cool, very cool. On that, would you like to say anything in conclusion to the fans, or?
Well, want to let them know that don't be lazy about checking out my new music and watch a YouTube. Well, first of all, like BK3, for example, I recorded it in like, great studios.
Right.
The sonics of it is real top-notch, and, I'm using like studios like Kiss uses.
Right.
In fact, the photo shoot and the art director are all guys that have worked with bands like Kiss.
Right.
So don't look at it like I'm printing these up in my, off of my, Apple computer or something. You know what I mean? And the artwork comes off of a PC or something. So just, check it out.
Very cool.
And I always update my website. I always have some blogs up there when I've done something like really interesting, like the Fantasy Camp or touring in Australia or going to the NAMM show and meeting a lot of cool people,
Right.
So Kulick.net is the website. Obviously, there's email address on there if someone wanted to write me. And I do read my mail with my merch girl and go over things and take care of, certain requests. And then the other thing, obviously, with Facebook so popular, some people don't even want to email anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? And the Facebook, the official page is easy for anyone to say they like, so they can be a part of that. And then the other one, I'm running out of room because Facebook only has only allows you 5,000 friends on your personal page. So I do have fans on there. When I didn't realize that, I thought it was like MySpace, just like add everybody. But that one, I basically share the same content on both ones, even if it's as silly as like a picture of my old dog or some new guitar. I put it up on both. There isn't a big difference between the two, but there's some people always begging me to get on, to be the friend, and they don't understand that I'm not really treating either page differently.
Right.
So.
Right. Very cool. Well, thank you very much once again, Bruce Kulick, formerly of Kiss with Grand Funk. Thanks a lot, man.
All right. You take care, Brian. I know we've been trying to do this for a while, so I'm glad we got it taken care of.
Great. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.